The wind off Blackwater Bay came knifing through the teeth and gargoyles of Dragonstone, and the sea beat the basalt like a drum. Torches guttered along the quay where the royal galley had nosed into its moorings like a bright, drunken guest at a funeral. The oars had shipped, the gilded stag's head shipped with them, and the men who leapt ashore lowered their eyes from the carved dragon that craned over the landing with a mouth like a cavern and iron fangs that flashed in each blaze of lightning. It was a place fashioned for secrets and storms, and both had come ashore. Robert Baratheon stepped to the stone, shrugged a heavy cloak from his shoulders, and laughed as the rain hit him. He still wore his crown because he always forgot to take it off, and because even in the rain and glare of the torches it seemed to fit him like an old jest. Good for a moment's warmth. The belly beneath his jerkin strained the buckles, and he had a wine flush on his cheeks that any man would have named cheer had there not been that tightness at the corners of his mouth that said, "Do not press me tonight." Eddard Stark stood just behind the king, sober as the carved dragon and as dark, his hair limned with rain. He had the look of a man who had warned an old friend against folly and come regardless to stand beside him when folly was chosen. Barristan Selmy, still straight in his white cloak, still a sword shaped into a man, flanked them with a pair of Kingsguard. The rest of the party had been chosen for silence. Men who loved no one but their own pay, or men whose honor ran so deep that secrets foundered in it and drowned. On the landing, a figure waited under a hood with the patience of a reef. When the hood was pushed back, the torchlight found a face fine down to its bones like a blade kept wet enough to shave with. The mouth was thin and bloodless, the eyes gray as iron. Stannis Baratheon studied his brother as if the sea had coughed up something half familiar and half drowned. The wind clawed at his cloak and made it flap like a banner of night. "No fanfare," Robert said. "Not a trumpeter, not a whore, not so much as a—" "You are late," Stannis said, stone upon stone. Robert's chuckle died. He gripped Stannis's shoulder and felt how hard the scarred knuckles were beneath his palm. Once, on a muddy hill before the Trident, those knuckles had held a garrison on starvation and pride. Robert had relied on them. He tried to tear the years from between them with the gesture, but Stannis stood square and took the weight and gave none back. "You sent for me," Robert said, "and here I am. I sent for no one." Stannis's eyes slid to Ned. "He sent for you, I think." Ned would not look away from either man. "I sent word that you were right. When I am right, no raven need carry it," Stannis said. "But if the king is to hear a thing, best he hear it where walls keep their own counsel." "Then let's to your counsel," Robert said, and pushed past him into the mouth of Dragonstone. They wound up stair after stair that seemed to have been cut by the talons of the keep itself, and the torches burned in iron sconces forged to look like grasping claws. It was all dragons here, carved in the lintels, snarling at the turn of every corridor, rearing from balusters. Even the door that Stannis shouldered open into his chamber had its hinge in the iron maw of a beast that would have eaten the moon if it could. Salt hissed in the winds from the arrow slits, and the sea muttered its low, patient song. On the trestle table in the center of the chamber lay a book bound in oiled leather, its edges dark with use. Beside it stood a man whose beard was a smoke-gray tangle, and whose eyes had the watchful distance of someone who had learned to listen at oars. He had the build of a dock-pile and the knuckles of a man who had made hard bargains. Davos Seaworth bowed as they entered, awkward without servility. "Ser Davos," Ned said. "Just Davos here," Stannis said. "He is my man." "He was your smuggler once," Robert said, and then softened what might have been a sneer with a grin. "I am glad you keep those with salt in their blood. With King's Landing full of perfumers and petals, a man needs someone who knows tar." Davos dipped his head at the king and stepped back. He looked like he would prefer the black water beneath the quay to this room with its royal tempers. Stannis put his palm flat on the book. "Read," Robert puffed. "I have men who read. I have a hand who reads so well the letters fear him." "I read," Stannis repeated, and slid the book toward him, open to show neat columns of names and lines that gloved themselves around the centuries. "Mallion's lineages. We have had it in the tower for 100 years to gather dust. as kings do with truth. Robert leaned and peered. He blinked. If you think I remember my letters when I'm soaked to the liver, Ned? Ned came, the smell of wet leather and steel coming with him, and the candlelight took to the lines like sunlight on ice. Brown of hair, Mother Brown, Stannis said, the words falling as if each were a nail and his tongue the hammer. Black of hair, Father Black. Over and over until it is not a truth but a drumbeat. It is the music of the realm. Ned read, and memory moved under his face. Jon Arryn's voice had leaned to him in the dark, when the bells of the city had sounded like a heartbeat and the stink of the river had smothered sleep. The seed is strong. Jon had gone to his gods with poison in him and this truth in his mouth. Say it, Stannis said, and the iron eyes raked Robert's face. Ned lifted his head. The king's bastards have the king's black hair. Wherever they are found, whoever their mothers, black hair. A few, Robert said, the corner of his mouth twitching into stubbornness. A few
The gods lava jest.
Not a few, 100. I went to the Street of Steel and found you there in a boy you never knew, hammer in his hand and the hair of a midnight crow. I went to brothels with Davos and half saw you through candles and my shame, girls with babes black as pitch. I saw your shape in a gatehouse made in the Vale who bore a girl who climbs like a squirrel and curses like a cell's word. Stannis's voice climbed and then broke off, more controlled for the anger beneath. I saw you everywhere the sea throws its trash and coin ashore, and then I looked at your son. He has hair like straw. His mother's hair, Robert snapped. His mother's hair, Stannis said flatly. His brother's hair, his sister's, all three, and their mother's brother has hair like theirs. He slid his gaze to Baratheon now. How many highborn couples do you know who bear 3 children with the mother's coloring without exception, even when the father's is a darker strain that rules its seed for generations? It happens, Baratheon said, polite, not committing. It happens when the children are not the father's, Stannis said. He laid his hand flat on the book again and then released it, as if trusting the weight to hold the case. Cersei Lannister lies with her brother and has given you his bastards. The words hung in the chamber as the wind probed the arrow slits and the sea swelled its chest and let it fall. Robert's mouth worked, as if his tongue sought purchase on a curse or on a denial too large to carry. He had been told in the tired hints of Varys, in the careful respect of words that went to ground before Tywin's gold glare, in Ned's grave silences. He had refused them because refusing let him live another hour as he had been. Faced with Stannis, he had no place to set his foot but truth or rage. He chose rage because it made a better fist. You sit in your rock counting hairs in books while I have ruled a realm, he said, and his voice made the candles shiver. You skulk. You judge. I have sired more children than you have smiles, Stannis, that is true enough, but I have known them when I raised a cup in a commons and saw my eyes looking back. Are you asking me to hang children because you found a black-haired boy with a hammer and a book that says, I am asking you to look, Stannis said. Look with the eyes a king needs. It is not a hammer in the boy's hand that condemns your heirs. It is the boy's hair, the boy's jaw, the boy's blood, and the book that tells blood how it behaves. And if the book did not exist, there is the taste of it in the mouth. I tasted it and went to Dragonstone because your court would not hear it spoken. Ned's voice came quieter now, a solidity against the wind. Jon Arryn died for looking. He went to see one of those babes with hair like midnight, and he came back with poison working in him. That will be answered, Stannis said simply. For a long moment Robert said nothing. His eyes were not a king's now. They were a brother's, and then they were a boy's, their blue clouded with hurt and then clear again with fury. He looked at Ned and found no rescue there. He looked at Baratheon and found a white wall. He looked at Davos and found a man who feared for the king as he feared storms when he could smell them before the gulls even turned seaward. Bring the boy, Robert said. At a gesture from Stannis, Davos slipped through another door and returned with a youth lanky enough to still be in the awkwardness of growing. He had shoulders already beginning to pleat with muscle, and when he moved the lines of him had the simple honesty of labor. His hair was so black it shone blue in the candlelight, and the eyes under the fringe were a true, startling blue. His hands were too big for delicacy, and there was a smear of soot along one wrist from where he had tried, and failed, to wash it clean before being marched into a lord's chamber. "What is your name?" Robert asked. "Gendry," the boy said, and stared. He stared at Robert with the frankness of someone who had never been taught to drop his eyes for any man. "Lord." He looked at the crown then, awkward, as if someone had just remembered to plant a tree on a boat. "Your Grace." "What do you do, Gendry?" "Apprentice Tobo Mats. My master says my draw is strong and true, and my tempering is better than my peening, but I'll take the peen yet." He scowled, as if daring anyone to say otherwise. "It's not easy to learn both at once, but—" Robert barked a laugh that broke off like bread. He looked at the boy's hair for a long time, then at the jaw that was his own, then at the boldness that made his blood itch. There was pride and pain and foolish tenderness all tangling themselves in him at once. "You mother. What was she?" "Dead," Gendry said. "She had hair brown as old mud. She laughed. That's all." Robert nodded as if a storm had knocked some sense into him that he had not wanted. He stepped back. Stannis's face remained the face of judgment carved out of salt. "Now you have seen," he said. "If we go back to the city and say nothing, the Queen will hear we were here before our oars are dry, and she will serve you wine enough to float a fleet. If we move justly, we must move now. And do you know justice so well you can find it in the dark?" Robert said, not softly but not with despair either. "I know the law," Stannis said. "It is not a pretty thing, but it keeps men from cutting each other into meat. The princes are not your sons, nor is the princess your daughter. The marriage with Cersei Lannister was built on a lie whether you knew it or not. The faith will annul it for incest if we show them what we have." "And what do you counsel?" Ned said. Stannis's gaze flickered to him and back to Robert as if reluctantly acknowledging that Ned's voice might be the oar that caught the true water. "We go back tonight," Stannis said. "We keep our mouths tight as seals. We place men we trust where bribes won't reach. Jacelyn Bywater has a spine. Put him over the city watch and send Janos Slynt to guard a bridge in the far end of the world. Baratheon keeps watch over your person. We send for the High Septon in the morning with enough armed piety to make him bold. We call a council and present the book, the boy, and the king's eyes. And then we take the queen's household into custody until the faith renders judgment." "And Jaime?" Ned said. Even saying the name in that room seemed to make the dragon carvings tense their paws. "We will not call it a trial until a Septon has been found with 2 hands and neither of them a Lannister," Stannis said with contempt. "But the white cloak does not make a man unanswerable to the king. I would have his sword from him and put him in a tower." "And Tywin?" Baratheon said. "We'll go to war," Stannis said. "Whatever we do not carry him. We break him or he sits on our shoulders." For a moment the king was a younger man, the light learning the old angles of his face again. Everyone felt it, even the stone. "Aye," Robert said, and picked up the book with more respect than he had picked up a woman in years. "We do it now, and gods help the lions if they show me their teeth." They went down to the quay with the rain lashing them like reins and the torches making mists of their hair and cloaks. The royal galley's lamps made floating stars on the black water, and the brass of the oars thudded like a heartbeat as the men fell to. Stannis stood with Ned and studied the line of the city across the bay, invisible now behind the night. His anger had become a tool again, less visible than a hammer, more useful than a blade. Davos did not return to his bed. He slid instead into a skiff with 4 of his men and went ahead of the royal galley like a pilot fish. He had a pocket pouch that was empty of the bones that had once rode there, and he missed their faint rattle the way a man misses a charm he knows never truly helped him. He had paid the price in finger bones once to bring onions into a starving castle. If the gods cared for such things, they had eaten well in him. He did not trust gods, but he trusted tides. The oars dipped and rose, dipped and rose. King's Landing waited with 1,000 open ears. By dawn the sea had smoothed to lead, and the city roused to the clop of hooves and the shuffle of shutter boards. The red keep squatted over it all like a big red cat that had eaten one too many pigeons. The king's men came like a knife through cloth, fast and ugly, their hooves ringing on the cobbles and the wind tugging at the royal banners. Baratheon went ahead in white, and his horse threw slobber at the guards as he spoke to them. The great gates groaned. Stannis' men had already gone before the sun with sealed orders that did not permit themselves to be questioned. In the watch barracks, Janos Slint woke from a bed that smelled of grease and glory and found a paper that sent him to the mud gate with 50 men and the promise of a purse that was light as a jest. Jacelyn Bywater met him in the outer yard with courtesy, and then forestalled every protest with a smile that showed a few teeth and the fact of 2 companies behind him whose men wore no lions anywhere on their persons. Bywater's hand closed over Slint's shoulder. "The king's orders," he said, and meant it. And the city watch learned that dawn that there is a tone to truth that no coin can mimic. In the Tower of the Hand, Peter Baelish poured a goblet of watered wine and stared into it as if it might show him some convenient reflection. When the bell rang for the council, he had set his mouth into the shape that was neither smile nor frown but both. Varys floated through like a perfumed fog, blinking and murmuring. Grand Maester Pycelle tugged his beard with fingers like roots. Renly Baratheon arrived last, smelling faintly of flowers and steel, and stood with his thumb hooked in his belt as if waiting for applause. The king entered not long after with Stannis, and something in the room changed that was not only the way all the men bent the knee. One brother's presence made the other look more like himself, and in that mirror, some saw the boy on the trident and some saw the man who forgot to take off his crown when he fell into his cups. The council saw, too, that the king's eyes were not bleary. They were blade-hard, and Baratheon stood behind his shoulder not because custom put him there but because he was needed. "My lords," Robert said, which in itself put salt on the table. He did not waste charm. "We do business early. Send for the High Septon. Not another fat gull but the one who wears the crown and thinks himself the smith. Bring him with 10 of his fattest and make them walk. I would not have his holiness faint on the climb and blame it on my haste." Pycelle swayed. "Your grace, he will be offended if—" "Your beard offends me, and yet I allow it in my presence," Robert said. "Send, or I'll send you with a bell and a bowl and call you the beggar's beggar." Baelish smiled a little and watched the currents shift around him, and thought of serene, costly fish. Varys made a murmur so soft it was a sigh. Renly's eyes cut to Stannis and back, measuring old corals and looking for a gap wide enough to slide a dagger through. He did not find one and so contented himself with tapping one finger on his belt in a rhythm that made more noise than seemed possible. When the High Septon came sweating and panting and hating the steps, the king had the throne room open to them. The hangings were new, the floor waxed. The swords pointing inward in their cruel hedge around the iron throne had been polished so that they drank the light. Cersei was sent for and came, her hair caught in gold wire, her mouth proud, her children flanking her like perfect figurines that had come off a craftsman's wheel. Joffrey's chin jutted. Tommen's softness made him more human than either of the others. Myrcella's eyes carried shadows that had no business in a child. Jaime Lannister came, too, all white and gold and ease, carrying the white sword as if it were a piece of art to be displayed. He looked at Stannis and smiled the smile of a man meeting a habit he does not intend to acquire. "Your Grace," Cersei said, and dipped her head in a way that made the dip an accusation. "I am called from my bed to see the High Septon rub his toes and a flock of sparrows clatter their rosaries. Is there a new custom I should learn?" "There is an old custom called truth," Robert said, and set the book upon a lectern so plain as to be insolent. "Your Grace," he went on, nodding to the Septon with a courtesy that had edges on it. "The realm asks the faith to hear proof of a marriage unclean. Here is blood written into history. Here is a boy whose father shows in him like a hammer's mark. Here are my eyes." He swung his gaze to Cersei's children with a blow that would have broken ribs if it had been a fist. "And here are the king's heirs, all fair. My wife has been unfaithful. If the faith finds what law finds, I ask that the marriage be dissolved and the children named not in my line." There was a sound like cloth ripping very, very slowly. Jaime's hand tightened on his sword, and Baratheon set his on his hilt in the same instant. Ned's children stood by Sansa and felt their father's hand through the air. Arya held her breath as if holding it could hold the room together. Cersei laughed. It was beautiful. It was a drawing of a laugh. You are a drunkard come to church with wine on your breath and a letter from your brother saying God exists, she said. You summon me to be shamed and think to stand taller because of it? The High Septon cleared his throat, made a performance of it. Her grace will be heard. By what authority does this book acquire the tint of judgment? Anyone may write a book. As for hair, the stranger chose his colors. The father looks at hearts. Stannis's lips peeled back from his teeth, which was as near as he came to a smile. The faith married you to my brother. The faith is asked to do its work again when marriage is not marriage but a lie. And by whose proof? Cersei's eyes, too green, too bright, swept the room. Their brightness had that dangerous edge of someone whose mind cannot quite acknowledge the precipice and so dances upon it with a liveliness that is almost bravery. By a book that might as well tell me the maiden prefers fish? By a boy picked from the anvil and told he is the king's whelp because he shares his hair? Shall I bring you a dozen black-haired boys and make you a dozen kings? A dozen boys will not have this jaw, Robert snapped, unable to keep the pride from his voice. And a dozen books will not change how blood runs. And a dozen lies will not make mine son of yours. I didn't make these children, Cersei. Cersei flung her head back, and for a heartbeat her mask slipped. It was only a heartbeat, and then she had found her contempt again. You did not make much of anything of late years, she said. Others have to do the making for you, and they make things as they wish them. Enough, Stannis said. He turned to Jaime. Sir, your sword. Jaime let silence admire him before he answered, and when he did his voice was soft enough to be called courteous by someone who wanted to be fooled. My sword is on my hip, Lord Stannis. Some of us still place it on no table. In the king's presence, in the king's hall, on the king's business, Stannis said. You will surrender your sword or I will have it taken. Jaime's gaze slid, bright and lazy, to Robert. Brother to brother, he said. How will it be? He stroked a hand down the leather of his grip. Shall I knuckle my sword to the will of a man who hates me, or shall I keep the vows I swore and guard the queen? Baratheon did not give Robert time to answer. You swore to guard. The High Septon, who had the belly for many dinners and little for battles, dabbed at his forehead with a lace square and said, The faith will examine this book and it is boy. The faith will hear her grace's side. The faith will weigh what is to be weighed. He thought of Tywin's gold and Robert's temper and Varys's webs and prayed to a god he half believed in that he would keep his own head. While the faith weighs, Stannis said, the queen and her children will be lodged under guard in the maiden vault. They will be treated with every courteous cruelty the law allows. Their littlest finger will be attended if it pricks. Their tongues will wag as they like in the hearing of their ladies, and they will not pass a threshold without a white cloak watching them and a gray-eyed man measuring the distance to the stairs. You will not lay a hand on them, Robert said. He meant it. He hated Cersei with a vigor that had the feel of a bad marriage to it, but there was a line he would not cross. If a hair is lost, we will search for it in your beds and find it. Stannis said, I will obey the king. The city did not understand what had happened for one day, and then all at once it understood too much. Rumor ran like a pack of dogs without a shepherd. Lions had been caged. No, the queen had cut the king in his bed. No, the hand had found the queen with a sellsword and killed him, and now the sellsword was the hand. No, a book had made bastards of the princes, and all little boys with fair hair should run lest they be claimed for the throne. No, the faith had declared the king unclean, and the High Septon had choked on a grape brought him by a boy with black hair. At every corner, at every cask, voices clashed, laughed, quieted, and spoke in the tones people use when they think they stand on a small rock and the world is water. Arya Stark heard the city like a song and followed snatches of it until she found herself in the street of steel where the heat made the air wobble. She saw the boy called Gendry across a yard because he stood like he had his feet planted in work. He glanced up and saw a skinny girl looking like a boy and scowled at her efficient as a hammer. She scowled back and felt better for it. She had watched Jory's smile fade and had not forgiven the world. When a white cloak rode by, his horse stepping careful as silk, she spat into the cinders and pretended it was a lion's face. Sansa wept and then did not weep. She watched Myrcella's hands, so small, fold themselves very carefully when she was told she must go to a different room to sleep. She saw Cersei stroke Tommen's hair and for a moment forgot who Cersei was and saw only a mother. Then she remembered too much and took a breath that hurt. Joffrey stared at her with the brittle pride of someone who knows his pride is all that keeps him from falling to pieces and hates everyone for seeing it. Sansa looked back and her eyes were as cool and far as a lake under frost. Renly left the Red Keep that evening with 100 men and 100 smiles, took the road south, and told no one his thoughts. He had them, though. In one bag rode the idea of a girl with hair like summer and eyes that might make a king forget his cups. In another bag rode envy's old coins. He looked at Stannis and saw a man who would close a fist upon the realm and never unclench. He saw Robert and saw a man who would laugh until someone else died for it. He looked into his own polished steel and saw a younger man whose chin had not chosen yet what it would be. Varys moved like mist through a palace that felt heavier than it had in years. He whispered to himself as he went. "We do not bend history, we give it tasks," he said to an empty gallery. "Someone has chosen a task. Who will grow tired first?" His birds came to him and went again. Small hands sticky with apple or plums, voices eager. He loved them as a man loves canaries brought to mines. They die and you know the air is bad. Tywin Lannister learned of the insult to his house at sunset. The ravens came as he sat at a long oaken table in a draught so carefully controlled that the candle flames did not so much as quiver when men walked past. He read the first letter with no change in his face. He read the second and the vein in his temple lifted very slightly as if to stretch its legs. By the time he finished the third, this one from his daughter, letters too strong, too slanted, as if each had been stabbed into the parchment. Tywin had placed his cup aside, full. He did not drink or curse. He sent for his stewards and his captains and his ledgers and his daughter's box of rubies. He had the ledgers opened, moved a pile of beans from one bowl to another, and then called for his men to ride. Ser Gregor Clegane lit the Riverlands by way of answer because he was a man who understood only hot replies. Villages along the Mummers Ford learned the old law, that when a great lord's pride is pinched, the small folk must bleed to see if red is still red. Edmure Tully's outriders died in ditches, and the smoke from the wheat fields showed the sky the letter a man might write with malice and fire. Word came to the Red Keep before the rain did. Ned put his hand on the map as if to still it. He saw the river road and the golden tooth, and he felt a tug somewhere behind his breastbone that meant north and sun and duty. "Send me," he said to Robert that night when the torches made the council chamber into a cave. "Send me to Riverrun. I will take men to hold the fords. If Tywin wishes to come east, let him come hungry and cross water. You keep the city and the sea." "You keep the city," Stannis said stiffly. "I will take the fleet. I have seen Lannisport in the moonlight. It looks like a fat purse someone left on a table and went to piss. Will you leave your wife and daughter to be guarded by lions that know they are caged?" Renly said, "Not in the room and yet in it," a memory of a jest he might have made if he were there. Stannis's jaw made a line you could draw a muster on. Celis knows how to pray. Shireen knows how to read. They will do both while I do my work. Robert Lew. Ked between his brother and his boyhood friend and a map that seemed smaller than all the old stories he had once believed and all the new ones he had learned. "Stannis takes the fleet," he said finally, and Stannis inclined his head like a blade acknowledging another blade for not nicking its edge. "Ned rides for the river. I will ride with him." Barristan sucked in a breath he could not help. "Your Grace." "I will ride with him," Robert repeated, and smiled at Barristan with something that had no fat on it. "And if I die of the saddle's impertinence, I will die better than drunk on bull baiting and cups. The realm will know I did not die with a roast chicken in one hand and a breast in the other." "That is not how men have described your brave end to me," Varys murmured, and then smiled when Robert's glare found him. But perhaps the songs are written by men who do not know you. Perhaps, Robert said, and for a moment looked down a path that vanished into the dark. He did not take it. He took the path he knew. We ride for the river at dawn. It was a terrible dawn for riding, low clouds, air that smelled of tin and old iron, wind with a damp bite. But they rode, and the hooves made the kind of rhythm that makes men feel braver and smarter than they are. Ned took a man from each house that would send him one without grudge or groan, and Bywater gave him a tale of watchmen who could ride and didn't drink when told not to. The small folk lined the streets, as they do when they don't know if they will weep or cheer. Some spat at the king's passing because they had decided the tale where a drunkard had insulted a queen was the best one to tell their children. Some shouted that the king would bring them wine and put a gold coin in their cups because that was a tale that still clung to life. Arya looked at her father and then at the king and then at the road under their horses' hooves. She tried to memorize the sound because if you memorize the sound you can find it later. Sansa watched from the balcony with her hands folded so tightly they were white, and she prayed in the way children pray when their worlds tilt. Dear gods, let songs be true this once. Stannis had the royal fleet awake and angry in 2 days. He walked the quays like a surgeon, and his hands were as cruel. He traded captains like sticks until the music was right, and then he listened to it with the patience of a man who can hear weather before it has thoughts. Davos watched him and saw a depth in the man that had no kindness and no falter. There was justice in him like a keel, kept him straight, but if you got under it, you drowned. They put out on a night when the moon was shaved down to a sneer. They moved like a hand in an old glove, quiet, sure, aware of every knuckle. Off Lannisport, the blackness was so thick that a life's worth of bad deeds could vanish in it without leaving a stain. In the harbor, the Lannister fleet slept. Lannisport's lanterns put stars in the water. The sky was a low lid. In the quiet, a dog barked on a quay and heard no answer and lay down again. Now, Stannis said, and Davos waved the lantern that told the fireships to light themselves with their own misfortune. The first one slipped like a viper. It had been built to be poor and disposable, not unlike Davos once. It kissed the hull of a fat merchant tied like a goat to the dock, and then even the men who had lit it had to admire the way the flame took to tar and oiled oak. Stannis's galleys came in on either flank, their oars beating the night to a rhythm that was older than any Lannister pride. Men shouted and then coughed as smoke made their lungs forget their skill. There is a fairness to fire. It does not care who is clever and who is not. The harbor became a thing with a voice of its own. It cried out and crackled and spit, and each spit was a man's life. The fires licked the sides of the ships and then kissed the ropes and then climbed the masts and leapt with the joy of it. Stannis watched with eyes so calm it made Davos uncomfortable. He had been in fires before where lives burned cheap and food burned dear, and even then he had understood. Sometimes a man must be flint and not pine. Back, Stannis said when it was time, the same word he would have said to a horse or a child. The galleys backed water with that old or rhythm. Men with crossbows on the Lannisport walls with their lion badges shining shot into the night and might as well have shot into cold soup. When Flame found powder in one of the warehouses and made a roar that put a hand on your chest like a friend too fond, the Lannister garrison learned what it feels like to be made small by sound. Stannis gave no shout when the tallest ship toppled and knocked its fire into its neighbor. He did not have to. The men on his oars knew. Davos allowed himself 2 heartbeats of pride. Then he counted heads. The sea was a book in which he had learned to read loss. In the Red Keep, Cersei stood at the window of the Maiden Vault, and her face did not move when the ravens brought the news that her fleet was cinders and her father had sent his great maces to make kindling of Tully villages in answer. She had ceased to think the world would ever surprise her again. She had been wrong. She put a hand on Joffrey's shoulder and felt the hot, brittle tension in him. It was like touching pan glass just before it cracked. "Do not show them," she said. "Just that." He nodded, too sharply, and she felt a strange mix of pride and pity. She would have given the gods anything for him, even the truth, but the gods do not barter fairly, and they do not do returns. The High Septon weighed and measured and found 47 ways to say he would not judge until he could ensure that judging would not put his head on a spike. In the end, piety did not make the decision. fear did, and wrote piety's name under it. He declared that incest was a sin, that the faith deplored sin, that the faith had he. RD rumors it could not allow itself to credit, that the faith would examine. Robert let him prate because the city still needed a god to nod to and because Tywin was the only god likely to answer prayers with coin. Stannis suffered it because suffering had always been his principal virtue. In the Riverlands, Ned found the ford choked with broken wagons, charred staves, and dead carp, the rivers I muddied. He did what he could do. He put men where the land let them stand, he sent ravens, he burned bridges if they could be burned and garrisoned them if they could not. He tried to set a trap of water and patience. Robert could not learn patience from maps. He took men and baited Gregor Clegane with them and forced him to back off from a village where a mother had tried to beat out the flames from a child's hair with her own apron. The king found the old wind in him, and for an hour on a square of red dirt was the man from the songs. And then the hour passed. He was left heavy and human, and the songs do no sing of the panting and the sweat that chills under armor like a cold hand on a hot back. They met Tywin at the Golden Tooth because Tywin had the habit of moving to the exact place where men had decided not to fight. He had ranks as tidy as ledgers and banners that did not droop in that damp air. He had Sir Adam Marbrand on the left and a score of men in shirts so clean it might have been laundry day. He had a face like an old coin, stamp strong, where visible value unquestioned by those who took such coin and spent it. "Your Grace," Tywin said, and bowed with enough grace to make mockery unnecessary. "I regret that I must receive you in the field. You have insulted my house. I have come to present my reply." "Burning a Riverland," Robert said. "It's a queer reply to an insult to burn a farmer who has never seen a lion." Tywin's mouth made something that could be mistaken for a smile if you were far away and blind. "I sent men to remind you that kings who seize queens must meet lords who do not allow it. If I had sent a letter, would you have read it?" "Stannis would have," Robert said, and laughed without amusement. "But then he would have put it into his book to keep it from the rain. I do not read well in the saddle. Are we to fight, Lord Tywin? Or are we to stare until twilight and call it a draw because men must piss?" "We will fight," Tywin said. "We will fight until you are forced to return my daughter and my grandchildren to me." "They are safe," Ned said, riding up until he and Tywin could smell one another's horses. "They are safer than any Riverland child you burned this month. And your daughter will be judged by the faith." "My daughter will be judged by me," Tywin said, "as will the king." He looked to Robert again. "When we are done here, you will owe me apology or blood. If you give me apology, I will accept it. If you give me blood, I will take it." "That is fair," Robert said, satisfied. "I am no man to quibble with a lord who tells me his terms like a man. My terms are these. You will lay down your arms, send your banners home, and shorn your lions, and come to King's Landing to bend the knee, and there you will have a trial by your peers for the crimes already committed. If you refuse, I will cut you to pieces and feed you to the carp of the trident. And then I will come to your rock and smoke you out of it the way my brother smokes rats from a hold." Tywin's eyes did not change. "We are done then," he said, and raised a hand. The lions came in quiet and then loud. The stags met them with a bellow. It was not the trident and it was not a tourney green. It was a piece of ground that would remember iron longer than it would remember kneeling. Ned's footmen did what footmen do. They made a wall and they congratulated one another for being brave enough to stand. The horse made lines and then the lines were broken where they met lines coming the other way. Robert's hammer found a helmet and dented it into a skull and then found another because old tricks do not rust. Tywin watched the battle like a god and moved his right wing in like a shutter opening just when he judged the timing right. He meant to pinch and crush. He very nearly did. Ned saw it coming and put his own men where their bones would matter and not their names. He sent a rider with lungs like bellows to the left to tell a petty lord, whose great-grandfather had married a miller's daughter, that his time had come to be a song. The petty lord died well, which is all anyone can ask of a petty lord. Tywin's pinch met bone and bruised the fat of the army rather than its throat. Robert rode where the pinch was worst and swore like a dockman until his throat bled. And then he laughed because he had blood that was not Dringer's blood on his tongue, and it tasted like the thing he had spent 10 years missing without knowing it. They did not win. They did not lose. When twilight came like a fold being drawn over the land, both sides made the noises men make when they pretend they have chosen to stop fighting. Tywin stepped back without showing that he had stepped back. Robert spat out mud and a tooth he had chipped years ago and forgotten about and called the day a decent one. "We cannot do this forever," Ned said when they made their campfires and burned a last cow some reeve had counted only yesterday as private wealth. "The Riverlands will be bone. The small folk will hate us and the wolves will come down from the hills and steal our dogs." "I know," Robert said. He looked at his hammer and remembered that the last time he had done this he had been thin and furious and had a friend named Rhaegar. The world had been simpler because he had told himself it was. "Then we must do something not like this." They did. Ned sent for Riverrun's men and got them, and sent to the Vale and got silence, and looked north and thought of a boy not yet a man with a taste for honor like his father's. He hoped he could keep the boy where a boy belongs. Tywin waited, and waiting was a weapon too. Stannis' messenger came in with the salt still in his hair and said, "Lannisport burns yet," and set a spark to Robert's spirits that no wine ever could. They took the offensive because offense is the only polite thing to do when a man of Tywin's sort thinks he has you at his dinner table. They moved not toward the rock, which would have been what a song expected, but into the hills where Lannister bannermen were not used to seeing anything but deer whose antlers were nothing like a Baratheon's. They cut supply wagons and left the golden lions pissing into their cupped hands. They forced men with lions on their chests to trade apples for meat in villages where the apples had not ripened. Tywin shifted to meet them because he always would, and in the shifting lost time. He hated losing time more than he hated losing coin. Robert learned it. He told jokes about clockmakers and could not help his appetite for seeing Tywin's mouth thin and go whiter. In the city, Cersei learned to live inside a space that could be crossed in 20 paces if you took small steps. She learned where the cracks in the floor were. She learned the pattern of the bells so intimately that when one was missing, she knew which. She learned the names of the guards outside her door because they were men whose names could be used as knives. She whispered to Joffrey until he fell asleep about kings who had been robbed and then had regained their crowns, and she kissed his hair as if love could dye it. Myrcella learned to sew so carefully that she could turn a hole inside out until it was a poem. Tommen learned not to cry and hated himself for it. Sansa came sometimes and sat very straight. The queen never spoke to her cruelly again. Cersei would be cruel with a sword, with coin, with power, but not with this girl whose love had been used as a leash and then cut. Jaime in his tower learned to live with white walls. He had never known how present he was to himself until no one else was present to him. He whistled, and it made the walls whistle back. He learned to hate his own annoyance with the whistling, which felt like running around in a very small circle. He thought of Cersei until thinking of Cersei was like rubbing a tooth his tongue could not leave. He stared out at the city and wondered which of its alleys would kill him if they let him go. Varys found Littlefinger asleep in his chair one night and woke him with a breath. "We will have a war that ends," he whispered to Peter. "Unless we do not." Baelish smiled in a way that opened 6 new roads. "A war that ends," he said, "is very bad for business. Alack. We both serve the realm," Varys said, and put a droplet of honest amusement into the words, the way a cook puts salt into something too sweet. "We serve our appetites," Peter said cheerfully, "and teach them to costume themselves like queens. If lions fall, who buys silk? If stags grow too fat for running, who needs a stable boy? Would you rather have wolves?" Varys said mildly. Peter looked at him the way a man looks at a gaming board. "I would rather have a board and pieces and a player who thinks he is playing alone." The faith made its decision at last when a group of septons found the courage to tell their high septon that courage was required. They told him he could not polish the matter any longer. He wept because he knew the matter was a stone and his tears had not changed it, and because he had always hoped to be the sort of man who did not weep when asked to be brave. He dressed in his best linen and went to the throne room with a procession of men who had hearts like ballast. He declared that the marriage of Robert Baratheon and Cersei Lannister had been no marriage in the eyes of the Seven. He declared that the children were not the king's. He did it in words that hung on his tongue and then fell, and afterward he needed to sit and ask for water, and he found his hand shook. Robert listened and did not move. Stannis listened and felt the deep click in himself that a man feels when something has locked into place exactly where it was meant to go. Cersei stood, and in that moment, she was a queen in a way she had never been, because she was a woman whose ruin was being made public and who would not let it take her posture. She said, "I have children. Whatever names you give them will not make them less mine." She did not look at Joffrey. She did not look at anyone. She walked out, and the guards made a corridor because some women still command corridors even with nothing behind them but defeat. After, in a smaller chamber where cloth kept the sound in, Robert said, "I will not kill them. I will not. They are not my joy or my shame. They are children." He was sweating, although it was not hot. "I will not." Stannis did not urge or scold. He looked at the floor for a long time and then said, "It is unlawful to name them princes. It is lawful to strip them of what name they bear that is not theirs. It is lawful to send them to their grandfather. Better that than the wall. Better that than the headman's straw." He looked up. "It is not just. It is what the law will bear." "And Cersei," Ned said. He felt hollowed. He thought of girls and an old gods would far away and a promise he had once made to a dying sister. Promises can be a man's marrow. They can be his chains. "Confine her," Robert said, and for a second he sounded like a man having a lie drawn out of him the way a thorn is drawn from skin. "Send her to Casterly Rock under guard. She will arrive with honor, and she will not leave. If Tywin wants her free, he will kneel where all men kneel." Stannis inclined his head. "Then the war will end. In time. Not before Tywin pays," Robert muttered. "I still have a tooth to chip on him." The war did not end with a stroke. It rarely does. It ended by ending less each day. It ended in rivulets. Gregory Clegane's men found less to burn. Edmure's men found more to steal back. Tywin's captains found their books of tallies starting to turn into prayers. It ended with letters. It ended with grudges being salted down and put away for later. It ended in the minds of men before it ended in tents. At the Golden Tooth they met again. Tywin had one less banner behind him. Robert had sweat already cooling on his neck. They did not bring their entire armies into parley. They did not need to. Tywin bowed less. Robert laughed once and then did not. "You will send my daughter to me," Tywin said. "I will send your daughter to you," Robert said. "With 20 knights I call my own. She will not step from her palanquin without one of them first placing a boot in the dust." "You will send my grandchildren," Tywin said. "I will send your grandchildren," Robert said. "They go as Lannisters. He embraced Myrcella, kissed Tommen's head, put his hand to Joffrey's shoulder and squeezed hard enough to make the boy look at him, and then he put his arms around Cersei and for an instant closed his eyes. Men who watched pretended not to see. It is a courtesy to a master. Back in King's Landing, Renly returned with Mace Tyrell's colors not yet flying, but with Mace's sun smiles already being practiced in his court. Renly brought Marjorie to be looked at in a gilded hall. Robert's gaze struck and then softened. The girl had a way of standing with her hands folded just so that made men forgive the world its ugliness for a heartbeat. And that heartbeat is all it takes to coax some men to change. She looked not unlike a dream Robert had once had when he had been a skinny boy. Drunk on a girl with a winter's name who had made him think poetry was something a man might do. He saw that it would be convenient to love this girl. He saw that it would be possible. Stannis said nothing. He had not come back to court for the presentation of a child to a man who would make her a queen in name. He was at sea when the wager was set, turning the fleet toward driftwood work and the defense of the stepstones against pirates who would test a realm that had just learned again how to blood itself. Davos stood at his shoulder and watched a gull and thought of his own boys. Devon growing into a place by this stern man's side, and others with salt too near their bones to ever take it out. Ned Stark wrote to Winterfell and tried to sound like someone who was not tired. Catelyn read the letter and pressed it to her mouth and went out into the godswood and spoke to trees that did not answer. Robb rode and rode because riding felt like movement and movement feels like safety. He wanted his father back like a man wants the path out of a forest before the snow comes. Sansa slept with her hands folded and learned to say less. Arya learned to hold a wooden sword until her arm shook and was happy in it in a way that made her feel guilty. Jon Snow stood on the wall and murmured, "The realm still burns," and felt, for a moment, a different sort of heat. On a mild day with colors he liked, Robert Baratheon married Margaery Tyrell in the Sept where he had once married a different dream. The bells made a brave sound. The High Septon smiled because no one was asking him to bleed for this judgment. Mace Tyrell smiled because he saw a garden spreading in his mind. Renly smiled because he was the man who had introduced the idea and therefore the man who had proven his mind clever. Varys smiled because the Reach had been bound to the crown and because he knew how many knots can be undone by one sharp knife. Peter smiled because he always did. After there was feast and after feast there was a bed. Robert did not drink as he once would have. He touched the girl with the delicacy of someone ashamed of his hands. For a moment he smelled snow and roses and a memory that no man could compete with. He shook his head like a dog shakes water and chose the living ove. Are the dead? The realm exhaled. It would inhale again. In the east, a girl with silver hair and eyes like amethysts was learning to walk through fire without screaming. In the north, men with dead eyes were beginning to remember maps that had not been drawn in 1,000 years. In the Vale, a woman with a mouth like a drawn bow sat with a boy at her breast and thought of poisons sweet as peaches. In the Rock, a boy with a chin raised too high picked up a sword and said its weight did not frighten him. In King's Landing, a man with a finger that liked to tap leaned over a ledge and looked down and smiled as if the drop were a friend. But for a time, short as a breath and just as necessary, the realm saw a war end because two brothers had chosen to stand in a storm-bent keep and decide that pride could be cut at the root and left to die. They were not made kinder by it. The world is not that sort of tale. But something that had once been broken had been set, and though it would ache in the rain and though it would never be the same limb it had been, it was a limb again and could bear weight. Stannis stood at the prow of his flagship and watched the foam break and reform. His face was as unyielding as ever, but there was the faintest easing at the corners of his mouth that a man who loved him, if such a man existed, might have called peace. He had the heir's cloak now by law and not appetite and wore it with the same discomfort with which he wore any garment. Davos looked at him and then at the horizon, and said nothing, because silence served sometimes where words only picked old scabs. Ned turned from the windows of the Tower of the Hand and sat with his ledgers. He hated ledgers, but he loved what could be done with them when done honestly. He had seen too much blood spend itself easily on the ground. He would spend coin like blood if it would keep men from testing their steel on one another's sons. In the evening, he walked in the gardens and thought of people whose faces he sometimes could not summon cleanly anymore because memory is cruel. He made it a point to speak to the gardeners and learn their names. Robert hunted less and held court more and found that applause, when soberly won, had a different sound to it and could be slept on. He learned to bear Margaery's careful gaze, which had kindness to it that he suspiciously examined each time, as if it might be bait to a trap. He drank good wine and stopped before the jug was empty. Sometimes he failed. He had never learned perfection and would not start now. One morning he rose before dawn and went to the armory and had a shirt of old mail brought out and shook it, and the dust that rose smelled like his boyhood and the fear he had outrun. Cersei sat on a balcony of Casterly Rock as the sun made iron of the sea and the gulls drew quotation marks on the air. Her father came and stood beside her and did not touch her. For a long time neither spoke. "They are yours," she said finally, low, hard. "Mine to raise but yours to make, because you always did." "They must be made again," Tywin said. "And better." She laughed, a knife of a sound. "Better? Better than what? Better than kings? They will never be kings. They will never be allowed crowns. If they wear one, it will be made of brass and sneers." Tywin's face did not move. "Power is not in crowns. It is in hands. Teach your eldest to use his." "Joffrey uses his hands when he is given things," she said. He hurts himself squeezing them shut. He thinks the world has taken something from him that he was born owning. He will hurt others for it. A Lannister who does not understand trade, Tywin said, and his disgust was almost fond. We will teach him. We will teach him with pain if necessary. You will help. I will, she said without hesitation. I will help him become something that survives. And so the realm moved into its next season with a limp and a scar and a habit of glancing south to see what the sea was thinking. Ships went east with wheat. Ravens went north with worry. Women set bread to rise and men spread maps on tables and tried to make the hills march where they wished. Ghosts of a war that had refused to be properly born haunted the corners of hearths. Songs were written and none quite stuck because the songs prefer men who die well, and the realm had chosen, for once, to live poorly and learn later to sing about it. On an evening of mild weather that made even the Red Keep seem less cruel, Arya Stark found herself on the practice yard with a wooden sword in her hand and a man with eyes like a cat's measuring her steps. He had not left, this water dancer, because Ned had asked him not to. Again, he said, when she made a clumsy parry. The king is not a boar. He will not lower his head for you. The world will not slow. You must. She tried again. He nodded. In a different court, quieter and filled with lavender from the Reach, Sansa sat with Marjorie and learned to stitch hems that did not pucker. Marjorie told her that people can be dresses when you need them to be, that you can let out a seam or take one in and make it fit, and Sansa looked down at her work and thought, not all. And then, maybe most. She managed not to prick her finger and took it as a sign. Robert met Stannis in a small room with a jug of wine he did not touch and a plate of olives he did not eat. They talked of ships, of taxes, of a plague of rats in the fish market, of a hedge knight who had insulted a lordling with a tongue too long. They talked of a letter from the wall, so bland it was clearly not bland at all. They did not talk of old hurts because they had found they would not change shape if examined again. They spoke the way men do when they have chosen to be brothers and are learning to be. When Robert rose, he put his hand on Stannis's shoulder and squeezed, and Stannis suffered it and said, "Do not squeeze me when men are looking," and Robert laughed and squeezed harder. Ned, passing in the corridor, heard the laugh and smiled to himself. He had given up hoping to hear such sounds. He went to write a letter to the boy he would always think of as his bastard and told him, "The king laughs again sometimes." When the boy read it atop the wall with the wind needling through his furs, he smiled in a way that did not make his brothers know why they felt warmer. In the east, a man with pale hair and hungers and secrets smiled, too, but differently. He moved pieces on boards and imagined other boards. He had a friend with heavy silk sleeves who would sometimes say, "The realm moves," as if it were a beast one could pat. He was not wrong. The realm slept each night unsure of how many dawns it had purchased with this peace. It slept and dreamt of lions blowing sparks and stags battering trees and of dragons curled under stone with breath hot enough to make even old wounds feel new. And sometimes, in those dreams, two men with the same jaw and very different eyes stood shoulder to shoulder and showed their backs to the enemy. In some dreams they died. In some they lived. In most they quarreled. In all, they chose each other when the choosing was the thing that mattered. On Dragonstone, the wind moved through the carved gargoyles and the sea beat steady, and the island learned the old lesson. That stone remembers. It remembered two brothers in the rain, a book upon a table, a boy with a hammer in his hands and someone's face in his bones, a promise made without being spoken. It remembered and kept the memory, and because some stones are kinder than they look, it did not tell. The day the raven came to the Red Keep with its letters black and earnest as the bird itself, it found Ned Stark in the solar where he did most of his fighting now. He had a stick of sealing wax stuck to one knuckle, and a ledger open to show a long line of sums that could be read as sorrow if a man cared to. The raven hopped from the sill to the table, left 3 small gray splashes, and fixed him with an eye that would have been comical if the world were not what it was. Cain, who had learned to move as quietly as a priest around his lord these past months, took the message and held out the little bone tube. The words inside had been written with a hand that did not bother itself with pretty. Lord Commander Mormont did not waste curves on his letters. Ned read once and again, slower, and then a third time, letting each line do it to him. When he was done, he felt for a moment like a man who has climbed a tower and looks over a wall expecting roads and finds instead nothing, and a cold that has teeth. He took it to Robert at once. The king sat at his breakfast with a crust in one hand and a rash on his temper because the cooks had dared to send him sausages too pale. Marjorie sat to his right and did what kind girls do when they cannot fix things. They made their faces brave and their hands quiet. Renly toyed with an orange as if he meant to juggle it. Baratheon stood as he always stood, a white wall behind the king's impatience. "You will forgive me, your grace," Ned said, and the king's eyes found the tone before they found the man. Robert pushed the plate away as if it had insulted him by being food. "What now?" he said, which passed for courtesy with him when Ned's face looked the way it looked. Ned set the letter down. Robert read it, straightened some, and then read it again, the crust in his hand stilling in air. He gave it to Baratheon, who took it as if it might bite, and then to Renly, who skimmed and smirked and then frowned and did not smirk again. "The Night's Watch sends for help," Robert said after a moment. He did not say the other part of it aloud because sometimes kings do not wish to put air to a thing until they have touched it from all sides. He tapped the letter with the crust as if it were a board and he a player unwilling to move. "The dead walking, the snow with eyes, whites in the Lord Commander's chamber, and Jon Snow with a burned hand where he took flame to one," Ned said quietly. He had not said the name yet. Now that he had, he felt more himself. "Mormont says it is no old woman's tale. He says the cold is not a winter's cold." Marjorie's fingers closed on her goblet. She had grown up in a country where cold came in the guise of frost upon a statue and made the stone look prettier. "The Night's Watch has starved enough these past years," she said. "If they ask for grain, we should send it. If they ask for men who are not murderers and rapers, we should give them that too. If they ask for fire, it seems we must build them a hearth." Renly tossed the orange and caught it and did not seem to notice that it was more savage than customary. "I have always suspected that the North made monsters of deer when it grew bored. Monsters are made where men do not look," Baratheon said. He tapped the paper with a nail. "The Lord Commander has not the habit of fables. He fought men at the fork and did not weep when boys died. He will not weep for ghost stories now. If he says the dead walk, we should think of boots and not jokes." Robert looked at the ceiling as if the carved beams could offer him an easier road. When he looked down again, it was with the face Ned remembered from a long time ago. A man about to decide because deciding was the only way to keep the world from pushing him. "We will send grain," he said. "We will send coin. We will send men who are not a danger to their fellows. We will send steel. We will send a lord," Ned said. Robert's mouth twitched. "If you mean me, I will meet you on the road and we will argue in the rain like boys until the world freezes about us. If you mean Stannis, if anyone can stare at snow until it melts from embarrassment, it is Stannis." "Stannis will go," Baratheon said with that mild certainty that grows from knowing another man's mettle. "Stannis will be told," Robert said. "Iwa-s." The raven with the letter for Lord Stannis found him on a deck in bright water off the stepstones. The deck was so clean you could eat off it, and the men so tight with their orders that you could have stacked them like cordwood. Stannis had been watching the horizon with his arms folded. His anger at pirates so transmuted into efficiency that Davos would have said it glowed like some dirty metal when you polish it long enough. The message changed his face only in the way a line changes when a stone is dropped in it. Davos read it after him and knew the sea had gone out from beneath him more than any tide could do. "The North," Davos said. He had always thought of the North as a direction and a habit. Now it had teeth. "The Wall," Stannis said. "If the Lord Commander has sent this, he has eaten pride for breakfast and washed it down with ink. I have not known Mormont to dine on humble. If he says snow burns, I will bring him fire." He turned the ship as if it had displeased him. The fleet followed as if they were his thoughts, obedient and precise. Davos stood at the rail and watched gulls turn like white punctuation marks above the water. "Will you go yourself?" he said. He knew the answer, but sometimes saying a thing aloud makes a man see it more clearly. "Who else will go?" Stannis said. A lord who finds fur too coarse? A knight who believes his vows are only to spring and summer? I have not yet seen a man who will do it whom I would trust to do it. I am the king's brother. The realm will take it seriously if I take it. And if the realm will not, then I will be there to put a sword through stories. Davos thought of the girl with the cat's eyes at practice in the Red Keep's yard, and of a boy with a burned hand holding a torch in a room with a dead thing that would not stay dead. He touched the place where once bones had rattled like luck in his pocket. It is a long road by sea and longer by land, he said. Then we will shorten it, Stannis said. We will go to Eastwatch. We will go up the Shadow Tower if we must. We will go where the wall needs us. The crown has done less for more foolish things. The crown in King's Landing did not look north alone. There were southern winds to catch and western coin to count, and, on one thick afternoon when the city reeked of fish and wet stone, a dwarf to receive. Tyrion Lannister rode through the city on a dun gelding that did not resent him for being what he was. Bronn rode at his side with the lazy care that is the only kind of care Sells words can afford. They came in by the river and climbed. The city's squalor amused Tyrion until it did not. Bywater's watchman eyed them gravely and then, catching sight of the lion on Tyrion's cloak clasp, eyed them gravely with a new kind of gravity. Ser Jacelyn Bywater, Tyrion said dryly when they were halted in the second court of the Red Keep by a wall of men with halberds. Unless you've changed your name to something longer. Your Grace, it seems my invitation was lost on the way. Fortunately, I brought a mouth with enough invitation in it to make up for any lack. Bywater did not smile. He rarely did. Lord Tyrion, he said, your father wrote ahead that you would come as envoy. The king will receive you when the hand says he will. And here I was expecting to be told the king will see me now because it is a very long climb to the hand's chambers and my legs tire more quickly than other men's. Tyrion patted his pony's neck. No matter. I have learned to stand on my wits. They do not break so easily as shins. When he came at last into the Tower of the Hand, he was met by Ned Stark and three kinds of silence. One was the silence of men who did not trust a Lannister but wished not to insult a guest. One was the silence of men who wished to be at their books. One was the silence of someone who had learned that laughing at small men is a coarse sport that only coarse men can play without disgrace. Ned had the third kind. Lord Tyrion, Ned said. Lord Stark, Tyrion returned, and bowed correctly because even a Lannister of his size and condition understood the weather and did not spit into it when the wind was not his. He took the cup of watered wine that was offered and did not make a face. I should not compliment your city's vintage, he said lightly, as it might go to its head. I came because my father thought it more reasonable to send the son who does not carry a banner than to carry your gates. I come to discuss my brother. Ned gestured to a chair. Tyrion climbed into it with cheer. Your brother is well, Ned said. He is in a tower that gets sun, his food is decent. He lacks only liberty. Many men exist in that condition, Tyrion said. Some are married. Forgive me, that was in poor taste. This court has tired of poor taste. He cocked his head. I am glad you did not kill him. I do not kill men to satisfy the outrage of an hour, Ned said. When we were certain of what we were certain of, we acted according to the law. Your brother was arrested for answering slow and smiling fast. And for being what he is, Tyrion said. A lion in a room full of men who do not like lions. Lions rarely learn humility. To arrest him was wise. To keep him, less so. My father will always hate you for it. But he will hate you less if you return the boy to his white cloak. He is a man. Tyrion spread his hands. Yes, that is the trouble. Ned did not want to like this one, with his jokes woven like gold thread through plain cloth. But he had spent months among perfumed men with knives in their sleeves and had learned to value any voice that showed its edges. Your father will demand more than release, he said. He will demand that Jaime be stripped of his white cloak and sent home to breed more Lannisters and wear a sword at your father's table. And you will say no, Tyrion said almost gently. He leaned back. I have a suggestion. Allow Jaime to return to service in the Kingsguard. Road keep him where you can see him. Allow him no leave to go west. We will call it honor, and it will be a hostage. Ned watched him. Your father will call that an insult with a horn on it. My father's nose has smelled worse, Tyrion said. The truth, Lord Stark? Tywin does not need Jaime to sit the rock. He wants him because Jaime looks like the parts of our house my father thinks deserve polishing. But there are other sons, and there are stones to put together what is broken. He will swallow the insult if it means war ends sooner. He is practical when pride is done with its breakfast. And what does your father ask in return that is not said? Ned said, It is one thing to hear a man say only what he wishes. It is another to point to what he is not saying. Tyrion smiled a little, impurities in his humor making it stronger, like iron. You have Cersei's children. You have returned them and their mother to the rock. For that I thank you. And for that my father sends thanks written in ink pale as milk, but it is there. He does not ask for more now. He will ask for peace that is real. He will need to summon his dogs back from the riverlands and deny them meat. If you release Jaime to his duty, my father will release a dozen petty lords from their own vows of vengeance. He will put down, for a time, the habit of replying. For a time, Ned repeated. For a time, Tyrion agreed frankly. We are speaking of Lannisters. We hold grudges better than coin. Ned looked at the ledgers on his table and then at the small man with a larger truth in him than was comfortable. You are not your father, he said. No, Tyrion said, and for an instant what sat behind his eyes was not jest. I am not my father. It is the one comfort I take to bed most nights. They made a bargain that day that looked like peace if a man squinted. Jaime was brought from his tower to the white of the Kingsguard's barracks with a ceremony that made everyone feel they were not witnessing a hostage transaction. He bowed, too elegantly, to the throne and took back the sword he had surrendered months past. His mouth made a smile that had no edges if you did not look too close. Barristan spoke to him quietly that night, of vows and of the order in which they must be kept, and Jaime listened with the attention of a student who intends to pass an exam and cheat gladly if he can. I am to keep you from your sister, Barristan said bluntly. I am to keep you from your father if the king commands it. I am to keep you from yourself when you would injure him. Jaime leaned, light, against a whitewashed wall that had known less pretty heads. And if the queen were here? He said, and what lay under his question was a coil that could not be cut with any sword. She is not, Barristan said. No, Jaime said. She is not. Tyrion visited him that night. They sat with a candle between and a jug of wine they did not drink until Tyrion said, They will not let you be. They never have, Jaime said easily, and poured anyway. Brother, this wine is poor. I have missed poor wine less than I have missed other things. Tyrion took a cup and let it perfume his mouth. Our sister writes, he said after they had been quiet the way men are when their hearts are making too much noise. She is safe. Her children are safe. Father is in a towering temper and in the same breath uses the word prudence. There is a creature like that only in the Lannister menagerie. Tell her that I am a crow in a fine cage, Jaime said. Tell her that if she loves me, she will keep her beauty far from me because I would ruin the whole world to touch it. You already tried that once, Tyrion said lightly. Twice, Jaime said, and smiled without humor. Elsewhere, trouble wears softer shoes. Littlefinger had ceased for the moment to test the gold cloaks. He had found in the lesser cells of the city's life cracks that would do. Coin ran under the streets like a rivulet that only he could hear. He spread a rumor here, tightened a purse there, left a cask of too light wine in the tavern where butchers drank. The city had grain, the Tyrells saw to that. He could not starve it into breaking, but he could make it boil. He was a cook with a very large pot and a taste for watching bubbles. The riot came not when it was expected, which is why it was a riot. The bells were ringing for the Queen's progress, nothing more than a ride through the fish market and on up to the great September. Marjorie wore green, that day the color of the first leaves in a spring that had run late. Sansa rode just behind, a little pale, but poised with a composure she practiced as if it were a dance. The hound paced to the left with his gelding stepping murderous and his mouth turned down as if life had given him a sour plum. Loras Tyrell rode to the right stainless and entirely aware of it. The small folk turned out because they had learned that looking at beauty improved an afternoon. A fishwife threw an apple at a preacher with a voice like a saw. The preacher swore and shoved the fishwife. A boy laughed at the wrong time and a guardsman cuffed him for it. The boy fell and heaved himself up again like a dog that has been kicked too often to learn not to love. The cuffing guard reached to drag him aside and the boy pulled back and the crowd's breath held. In such moments cities decide what story they will tell about themselves today. A shout went up and then a second shout answered it. Someone threw a stone, and then stones fell like a kind of rain. The queen's palfrey danced. Marjorie put her hand on its neck and murmured to it as if it were her brother. Sansa's hand tightened on her reins and she whispered, 7. Because no one had ever taught a Stark girl what to say when men did not behave themselves, and so she called on gods as if they were nurses. The hound's mount bared teeth because horses do that when men cease being rational, and Loras made his gelding a wall, his shield a secco. And wall. Bywater's men were there with their halberds, but they were men, and men who do not often see, up close, the love the small folk have for their anger. Someone grabbed at the queen's stirrup and received the hound's pommel for his trouble, and then he bled, and then blood told the crowd a new story, and the story shouted. Sansa saw a woman's face close to hers, twisted with hunger and rage into something without sex or age. Fingers caught Sansa's sleeve. She pulled away and heard fabric rip. Your life is cloth, she thought wildly, and hands will tear it. Marjorie did not panic. She had been told, too many times to count, that the people loved her. She had believed it when it cost her nothing. Belief is a hard garment to wear when stones are falling. She loosened the hand on the reins and held the other up, palm out, in a gesture so simple it might have been prayer. Please, she said. She did not scream it. She said it in the tone a girl uses when asking a child not to spoil a game, and it cut through the noise. Please let us pass. Please. The hound shouted something that was only halfway polite. Loras was moving, measuring where hardest the crowd pressed. And then, like a keel catching, the pressure went out of it. A woman, old or so sun-wrecked she looked it, wavered, lowered her hand, and the hands near lowered as well because so much of a riot is what other hands are doing. Bywater's men pushed cleanly, like men who had been drilled to think of their halberd blades not as arguments but as punctuation. The queen's party passed. After, in the shade of the great September where the air smelled of old incense and older stone, Marjorie sat on a step and tried not to shake. Sansa sat beside her and did not try not to. The hound stood with blood drying on one gauntlet and his distaste for all things that breathe written on his face. You did well, he said, as if such things should be said, and Sansa looked up in surprise to see who could be meant. Her Grace, Sandor said, giving the title a twist that could have been a jest and could have been respect. You did not scream. You did not kick your mare in the belly. You did not look to your pretty brother for rescue. Thank you, Marjorie said. She was pale in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sun. I spoke to a horse. He did not refuse me. Sandor grunted. Horses are better than men. They do not tell you lies with letters. Sansa stared at him. He returned the stare with indifference and then looked down at her torn sleeve. Keep that for a memento, he said. It will remind you that you have skin. Tyrion watched all of it with a fascination he would describe to no one. He had a vantage from a balcony where he had climbed like a monkey because small men learn to go where they must. He filed away 3 names of men who seemed to push hardest, and afterward he went to see Littlefinger and spoke pleasantries until pleasantries fatigued him. A riot with odd leaders, he said at last. Butcher's boys and a washerwoman and a priest who preaches in the square with his eyes shut. Not the usual meat. Peter's finger made the smallest tap on the table. Cities throw up their own leaders when necessary, he said, all gracious air. They are mushrooms. They feed on what we do not see. And on what you feed them, Tyrion said with a pleasant smile that put knives between the words. Peter smiled back. Surely you do not think me so crude as to send stones to men? I am an honest banker. I send only coin. Tyrion drank what passed here for wine and thought of 100 ways to salt a pot. Do it again, he said very softly, and I will tell the queen you did it, the pleasant queen, the one who will smile when she asks how much you like your tongue. Not the other queen. She knows you too well to bother smiling. Which queen? Peter said, and his finger resumed its tapping. We have had so many of late. At Dragonstone, or rather, in the shadow of Dragonstone, for Stannis had not yet set foot back upon his carved island. Another kind of news came ashore. A galley arrived out of the east with a pennon that meant trade and a cargo that meant trouble. Celis Florent watched from the sea-facing balcony where the wind made a mess of her hair and her prayers. She had been told a red priestess had asked leave to come ashore and speak to Lord Stannis of matters which concerned. She said, light. She is a foreigner, Celis said to the anxious lady who had brought the word, and the word foreigner had in it houselessness and ill-breeding and, most powerfully, interest. Bring her. No, I will go down. It will do them good to see their lady. Melisandre stepped to the quay like sunset stepping onto water. She wore red from throat to heel, and the fabric caught the light like flame does. Her hair was the color of polished blood. Her eyes were a black red where others should be brown, and they made men think of wine spilled and of heat. She looked upon Celis with such attention that Celis felt for a moment chosen, in the way only very lonely people can feel chosen. My lady, Melisandre said, I have seen your lord in my fires. Have you? Celis said, composed and trembling. And what does he do there? He stands against a darkness that does not tire, Melisandre said. He stands because others will not. He stands because he is made to. He does not love me. He does not love any god. He is iron. The god who is made of fire loves iron when he can find it. Celis lifted her chin. You have come to tell him this? I have come because a wall in the north has begun to remember that it was built, Melisandre said. Men will learn fear. I have come to show your lord that he will be a part of what answers fear. Davos first saw her at the foot of the stairs and did not like the way hot daylight seemed to follow her over stone. His dislike had nothing to do with piety. He did not trust what came calling with certainties. He had spent many years living by currents and learning that only fools think they know with whom they will share a cup tomorrow. He stood like a piling. She came to him and he felt ridiculous and real, as if she had seen the skeleton inside him and found it wanting. Ser Davos, she said, as if it amused her. You are no knight. No, Davos said. You will be, she said. He made a noise that could have been a laugh if men laughed at their own bones. I'm a smuggler and a lord's dog. I know how to fetch and I know how to keep my teeth shut. That's what my bones know. Bones know more than men allow them, she murmured, and then looked past him to where Stannis came down, each step a clause in one of his speeches. Melisandre bent the smallest of bows, which in such a woman felt more like a courtesy than a grovel. Lord, you are a priestess, Stannis said. Davos tells me you burn things. Better to burn than to freeze, she said. Better to be light than to be the cold that eats it. He studied her without blinking. And you have business with me. I have business with your brother, she said. He is king. I have business with you because you are the sword his hand will carry to the north. The road holds a night upon it longer than men can count. You will meet it. I will meet men with bad breath in black cloaks, Stannis said. I will meet ravens that fly in at all hours, and ice on my beard, and a commander who thinks a barge of words will move me. I will meet snow. If the night has more for me than snow, I will meet that also. You will meet something that needs king's blood, she said simply. Stannis's face hardened into something Davos had learned thin as paper. I have none of that to give, he said. Unless you mean my brother, and I mean to keep him. King's blood runs strange paths, Melisandre said, and turned her head toward the city as if she could see it over the curve of the world. There is a boy there with a hammer's jaw. There is another with a storm in his name, hiding in a southern castle with candles that smell of beeswax and fear. There are 1,000 choices a man can make when the night comes. Some are merciful, some are clean, Some are both if the god is generous. Davos felt his skin salt with heat and loathing. Edric Storm is a boy, he said. Gendry is a boy. I have sons. I am sick to my belly of kings and their priests discovering that boys have better blood than they. Ser Davos, Melisandre said, with the softness of a knife's edge. The god does not choose such things because they are fair. He chooses them because they are necessary. I will carry the king where the king orders, Davos said to Stannis. I will bring him to Eastwatch. I will bring him to the Shadow Tower. I will carry him around the world if he asks. But I will not stand to see a boy's life put head down on a block because a woman saw shapes in a flame. Stannis looked from Davos to Melisandre and back again as if they were chessmen he hated to admit he needed. We will go north, he said. When the king says we go, we go. If there is a god who has business with my family, he may wait in the snow as well as he waits here. He is patient, Melisandre said. He has burned since the first dawn. The cold is patient too. Men are less so. Therein lies the trouble. At Winterfell, where cold had meaning even in seasons the South called warm, Catelyn Stark read Ned's letter about the wall and went to the Godswood and stood with her breath making little ghosts. Robb stumped across the yard later with Bran on his back to make him laugh and did not see the old gods look down through leaves that did not change. There are times when trees wish to speak and do not. This was one. Catelyn sent men to Maester Luwin to count the stores and wrote extra words to Ned that were not in her first letter. She spoke of Mance Rayder only because the letter from Castle Black spoke the name, and of dead men walking because to ignore such words is to invite them to your hearth. She thought of Jon. She never called him Snow in her private thoughts. That would be a meanness even in the mind, and found herself asking one of the old prayers. Keep him from danger and from glory because both kill. She imagined him with a burnt hand and would have given her own hand to change the image. She kissed the brow of each of her children and did not count. Counting is a way grief comes before it is due. In the Vale, Lisa Arryn read the same letter that had flown everywhere ravens could know. She shut herself in her chamber and told sweet Robin that giants were walking again. The boy listened with that employment of breath that only terrified children possess. Peter sat with them later and watched Lisa talk and thought, the cold serves me if it makes men cling to what is near. If the north shutters itself, I will have more windows to peer in at here. He wrote a letter afterward and sent it not to Ned and not to Robert but to Varys, who read it with no surprise, and then to Illyrio across the sea, who read it with a chuckle that sounded like fruit being squeezed. If the realm keeps one hand on its cup, Illyrio cooed, we will not have to knock it over. It will fall. Varys made a sound that might have been assent. Our boy grows, he murmured, in the way men talk of vines without saying the word wine. He is eager. He is almost a man. He speaks of Westeros as if its roads were a lover's skin. Good, Illyrio purred. We will bring him to the skin when the other lovers are quarreling. They are making up, Varys said dryly. The king laughs again. Hand and king tilt their heads at the same music. Stannis goes north as if it were a duty. Our plan does not like men who taste duty. Then we will give them another taste, Illyrio said silkily. Send him across sooner. Not with the Golden Company, with a small retinue. A myth does not require 10,000 to enter a city. It requires a face and a name and the rye. T's song played. And a prince who does not behave like a boy, Varys said. He thinks himself dragon. He must remember he is a man. Men die more cleverly. Illyrio smiled. He loved boys when they were wrapped like gifts he had chosen for himself. We will teach him. Across the sea, a girl with hair the color of new snow stood in the red light of a dying day and watched 3 small creatures make shadows on the ground that did not belong to anything natural. She had made a pyre. She had made a choice. She had walked and not screamed. She fed the little creatures meat and they took it and their eyes held hers. She had loved a man who had died while still breathing. She had borne a child and had not been allowed to keep him. She had learned that you could become a mother to something that did not ask you to be. We will go west, she told the creatures who could not understand words and understood something better. In time. First we will live. In King's Landing, Sansa sang softly to herself when she was alone, and the songs grew plainer. Marjorie came to her one afternoon with a basket of cloth and ribbons and a smile that had real things in it. "My grandmother says you have a face for honesty," Marjorie said, as if it were a compliment. "She says you should be taught to use it." "I do not wish to use it," Sansa said before she could stop herself. "I wish to be honest, and to have honesty be enough." Marjorie's eyes held hers without pity. "Oh, Sansa," she said, and touched her hand. "Would that were so." They stitched. Marjorie told her that in the Reach a woman might speak for a castle if her lord were away, and that voices are weapons more than knives. "Your father has a good voice for truth," she said. "I have never heard a better. But truth tires men who live too far from it. You must learn to say things that do not make them tired." Sansa said a hem and felt it lie flat under her fingers. "How will I know those things?" "You will watch," Marjorie said simply. "You will listen. You will think of what men want to hear that is not a lie. You will give them that. You will keep the rest of yourself for yourself." The hound brought word to the Queen's Solar that there had been knives found in the kitchen behind the butcher's block. "Knives in a kitchen," Robert said. "The next you'll tell me there's wine in a cellar." Sandor's burned face did not move from its disgust. "They had names carved into the handles," he said. "Coin behind them. Not much. Enough to be noticed. Someone's trying to make friends with butchers." "Friends," Robert said. "Is that what we call it?" He looked to Bywater. "Root it out." Bywater inclined his head. "I will cut it out," he said, and did it with the precision of a surgeon who dislikes his patient's chances. In a cellar under the Street of Flower they found a coin box with a mockingbird carved into the lid. When Peter was told of it, he laughed in public. "If my sigil could do my work for me, I should never leave my bed," he said, and drank a toast to the king's excellent health. The raven that bore Mormont's second letter arrived at midnight with frost on its wings. Robert read by candle while the city slept and felt something in him answer that had not answered battles nor feasts nor marriage nor reconciliation with a brother. Sometimes men need a fear that is bigger than themselves in order to fit better into their own skins. "Tell Stannis to sail," he told Baratheon, who was never surprised that men must be told a thing twice. "Tell him he has the crown at his back." Baratheon nodded. He could not go north. He was the king's sword, and kings do not go north. He felt the jealousy of a man who wishes to test himself against elements no court provides. By morning the court knew. Marjorie said she would light candles in the sept each night until the fleet was lost to sight. Renly laughed and said something about snow being a maidenly weakness. Ned started laying out the men and coin like bread on a table. They saw Stannis off at the harbor with less fanfare than such deeds deserve. Davos stood beside his lord with a face like the side of a cliff. Melisandre stood not far away with her eyes shut and the sun upon her cheek like a kiss from a lover who never tires. She had spoken to Robert and found him courteous and unconvertible. She had spoken to Ned Stark and found him courteous and distant as the moon. She had spoken to Celis at length and found in the woman an emptiness that a god could fill. She had spoken to Shireen, who had looked at her with a sober curiosity that made Melisandre, just for a heartbeat, feel older than fire. When the oars took to water, Sansa was on the quayside. She did not know why she had come. She had set her hem flat and had thought of men moving toward a wall. She had thought of snow and eyes and fire. The wind curled hair out from under her hood and made it seem possible that she had been born for cold. Arya came running along the quay and stopped breathless because she had expected to be told to stay away and no one had told her. They stood together without touching and watched the ships move like small determinations into a bigger determination. "Do you think he will meet them?" Arya said, "Meaning monsters." "Yes," Sansa said, surprising herself. "I think he will meet something." Stannis met weather first. It took on men like Stannis bear men, briefly, without ceremony and in such a way that weather respected him for it. The fleet moved like schools of fish around a current they could not change. Eastwatch's long pale wall rose up like a thumb outlining the sky. Men who had sailed in seas milder than this found themselves thinking small thoughts and looking for familiar things. Davos looked for gulls. They went ashore as if the land might bite. Mormont met them with his cold face on and his kindness under it like hoarded heat. Jon Snow stood a little behind him with his hand in a stiff glove that could not hide teeth.
Irept Barnes beneath.
He looked at Stannis the way boys look at a thing that is not their father and is yet permitted to tell them what to do. Stannis looked at Jon Snow as if measuring a plank or a rope. "You came," Mormont said. He gave the fewest words to those he felt deserved more. "I came," Stannis said. "Show me what you fear." Mormont took him into the keep and up into the chamber where the burned remains of what had once been a man had left char like a signature along a wall. He took him to the ice and let him lay a hand upon it. He took him where the wind could prove its teeth. He did not take him south to explain the matter with maps and words. "We held the last of them off," Mormont said. "We will hold the next if they send the dead. If they send the living, the wildlings, if they come in number, as this boy's uncle says they will, we can bleed them and we will, but no wall holds forever without men upon it in number and with bellies full and steel at hand." Stannis put his palm against the wall and felt it take his heat and not return it. "This is not one of your southern septs," he said to Melisandre, who had come behind like a shadow that brought its own version of light. "Pray to your God, pray to mine, pray to all of them. The wall will continue to stand whether the gods pretend to listen or not. It has stood because men froze here. That will not change. It will stand better with fire," she said. "It will stand best with men," Stannis said. "Lord Commander, I have 2,000 I can spare to garrison towers and break the backs of men who try ladders. They are not boys from a city with soft hands. They are my own, and they are as impatient with cowards as I am. I have gold to pay for heat and for meat and for iron. The king sends his name. And will he come?" Mormont said, never one to waste the angle of a question. Stannis turned and looked north along the line of ice. "No," he said. "He is a king of a city. He will keep men's bellies full there and keep his court from cutting itself to pieces. He sends me because I am a man who enjoys neither feast nor dance. Each man to his talents." Melisandre watched Jon Snow while the men spoke. She had seen him before in flames that danced as if they were remembering an old habit. She had seen him with shadows around him bright as crowns. "You burned the dead," she said to him when they were left alone for a moment as men are left alone like kindling sometimes. "Yes," Jon said. "You were not afraid," she said. "I was afraid," Jon said simply. "Afraid and angry and sick. I burned him anyway." "That is better," she murmured. "You will need both fear and anger." "I would rather have neither," Jon said, not unkindly. "You will not be given the choice," she said. She told Stannis, later by a brazier whose heat was as mean as a miser's penny, that the boy had a part in this. Stannis made a sound that meant he had a headache but would not dignify it with a hand to his brow. "He is a bastard," he said. "He is a sword," she said. "Some swords are better forged than others." He turned to Davos when she was gone. Davos, who had watched Jon Snow's face as you watch the sea for signs of change, said, "He is a boy who does what is in front of him. I have always trusted those more than men who plan 3 moves and trip on the first." Stannis grunted. "He is Ned Stark's. He will do what is written on his bones." "Then we will be able to read him," Davos said. At Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister received his daughter in a room that had made more men feel like boys than any other in the realm. It was big enough to diminish even anger. Joffrey stood behind his mother and tried to seem larger than he was. Tommen chewed his lip and stopped when his grandsire's eye found him with the gentle weight of a prod. Myrcella stood as straight as a little spear. Tywin spoke of lessons and of leather and steel and what a boy's hands must learn. He spoke to Cersei of dignity and discipline and of the uses of shame. She listened with her face like a lioness watching a storm. She went out afterward alone to a balcony and looked at the sea until the air had salted her face. "They will not break you," she told herself. "They did not break you in King's Landing. They will not break you in your home. You will turn men's orders into your own." Joffrey came to her at dusk. He did not look like a king. He looked like a boy who had been told he is a king and resented anyone who did not kneel inwardly. He said, "I will have a sword lesson tomorrow with Ser Adam. He says I hold it like a chicken." "Then hold it like a sword," Cersei said. "Hold it like you were born with it in your hand." He held out his hand as if weighing it. "I was born with something else," he said with a crooked mouth, "and it has not served me." She took his hand and squeezed. Hard. "It will," she said. "We will make it serve." In Old Town, where more books have fought than men, an acolyte with ink under his nails copied a letter from the wall and thought, the old stories were not lies. He put another stick on his lamp because stories must be seen to be believed. In Dorne, Doran Martell sat in his water gardens and read both the wall's letter and one of Varys' spiderwebs that spoke of a prince not very distant, and he closed his eyes. Oberyn walked into his thoughts as if they were a tent flap. "We should go north," the Viper said in Doran's mind. "We should go south. We should go everywhere at once." Doran held his gouty foot and gave no orders. Some men wore by waiting. In Pike, Balon Greyjoy stood on the sea tower and watched grey water hit black stone and said, "The Green Lands think themselves safe again." A daughter came to him, and he forgot for a moment that she was not a son until she smiled and he remembered. Euron came to the thought as easily as eels come through cracks. "The sea is a god," Balon muttered. "The sea will have its due." He sent ravens that did know. Fly to the Red Keep. He spoke to men who drew their strength from iron and salt and thought in simple directions. "When they look north," he said, "we will look east. When they look east, we will look east more." The world has islands enough for men who do not think the word tax can apply to them. Ned Stark dreamed, that night, of the Tower of Joy in a way he had not let himself in years. He climbed the steps and he heard voices and he saw stones soaked with the color that never truly goes. He woke with a hand to his chest and did not know why it hurt there. He rose and went to the gardens and spoke to a gardener named Harl. He said, "We must put more mint along the path to the kitchens. Keeps rats away." He said it because he could not say the other thing that stood in his throat like a stone. Sansa went to the sept and lit a candle for the men going north and another for girls who did not yet know what world they lived in. Arya learned to slip a knife from her sleeve and back into it with her practice master counting under his breath in a language that called water by names no Stark had ever learned as child. She did not think of death as a story. She thought of it as a fact. "Again," said Syrio Farrell. "Again." Tyrion found himself almost happy because being useful had always been his favorite disguise. He wrote letters to lords who disliked all Lannisters and found ways of putting phrases such that they thought themselves complimented more than commanded. He drank with Varys and pretended not to mind the man's perfume. He spoke with Marjorie and came away half in love with the idea of a queen who treated him as if he were a man and not a piece in a game he had not chosen to play. He looked upon Sansa and saw a girl who had learned in a season what many women learn in years and wished, for a very strange and un-Lannister moment, to be kindly used by the world. Jaime stood his watches. He kept his hands off his face when it itched because a white sword should not scratch in public. He did not go near the maiden vault, because there was no one in it he yearned to risk everything to see. He found himself speaking once to the Hound, and the two of them sat like men on a fallen log with a fire that was not a fire between them. "You think you are better than men," Sandor said, voice like a whetstone. "I know I am prettier," Jaime said lazily. "Better? Only at certain things. Like making oaths into toys," Sandor said. "And you into knives," Jaime said. Sandor made a sound that would have been a laugh if it had not been a growl. "We will see how many knives the winter takes. It likes to chew steel." Stannis wrote to Robert from the wall with a letter that had frost like sugar along its edge by the time it came to the Red Keep. He wrote like a man cutting meat. "We will hold," he wrote. "I will see what this wildling king is and how many bones his army has. I will set fire to what will take it. I will send you lists of what I take so that when you pay for it you do not curse my name more than is fair. Send more men if you have any that are not drunk. Your brother, Stannis." Robert read it aloud at the council and laughed twice. then set it down and rubbed his eyes, and when he looked up again something in them had been washed and was cleaner. "We will send him men," he said, "and coin, and, for my sins, we will send him prayers. Let us send him carpenters," Ned said, "and masons, and men who can count. If winter lasts and the north is hungry, prayers will fatten no one." "We will send him all of it," Robert said. He fixed Varys with a look that asked if the Master of Whisperers would object on some grounds of subtlety. Varys smiled and inclined his head. "If the north falls," he said, "there will be no subtlety. Even spiders need corners." Melisandre wrote a letter of her own to Celis, words like ribbons of smoke. She wrote, "We are the candles in a long hall. You must keep burning even when the wind is rude. Teach your daughter the names of the fires. Teach her that fear is a god's first gift to men." Celis pressed the letter to her mouth and took the ashes of a small cedar twig to the sept and burned them. The seven looked on with stone patience. Gods are used to being asked for different things with the same lips. In the weeks that followed, word came unevenly of the North's business, as word will, jumping like a fox from camp to castle. Stannis met Tormund Giantsbane upon a rise blown flat by wind and treated with him by not treating with him at all. He sent Davos to Mance's camp to speak as a man with missing fingers speaks to a man with too many choices. Mance Rayder came in his own time and had music in his voice even when he was measuring a man's throat. "You are the king's brother," he said to Stannis, who did not answer because he did not need to. "And you have brought wood with you. You think to burn the free folk out of their tents and into their graves when the cold is kinder than your fires. I think to stack your dead where they will not rise again," Stannis said. "Come to the south side of the wall and bend the knee, and I will give you land that a cow could eat without needing teeth. Stay, and I will kill your men until the wind wears them to bone." Mance smiled a little. "You should have been a song," he said. "Songs are good at making choices sound like there were only ever two to begin with." Davos said, "There are children. Bring them south." "There are always children," Mance said. His eyes, though, looked over Stannis's shoulder at the wall as if it had whispered his true name and he had not remembered he had one. In all of this, letters like thin birds flitted back and forth to the Red Keep. Robert learned to look for them not with dread, but with an appetite he had not felt since he had hunted with men he loved. He still drank more than he should some nights, and Marjorie would touch his hand gently and he would allow it, and he still roared at cooks and laughed at whores' jokes and slapped boys on the back too hard and had a scar that itched when the weather turned. But when he sat the throne, he sat it. He had never wanted to be a king of accounts and grain storehouses. Now that is what he was becoming, and he found, to his surprise, that there is a way in which balancing a ledger gives the same satisfaction as splitting a skull. Both are neat work if a man cares. Ned watched him do it and thought of the last time he had believed a man could change. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Men who change do not need witnesses to make it real. They need time. Time is the one thing stories never truly have. They hang by threads over pits, and every breath is a man's last before the fall. And yet, for a while, in that year when a king did not die when he was meant to, and a queen went west instead of sharpening knives, and a brother turned his fleet toward cold instead of to burning his envy into a crown, the realm was given what passes for time. Enough time for a girl to learn to hold a blade without flinching. Enough time for a boy on a wall to learn the names of the winds. Enough time for a smuggler to stare down a priestess and find he did not need a god to be loyal. Enough time for a queen to put her face plainly to the people and ask them to let her pass, and for them to decide that they would. Enough time for two brothers to set their jaws and hold a line no one had asked them to hold together since they had been boys. In that time, far to the east, an old man with dyed hair looked into dye-stained water and thought of a boy he had hung a false name on, as if it were a medallion that would save him from drowning. He said to his reflection, "Soon," and the reflection made the same mistake. In that time, at Casterly Rock, a lioness sharpened a little knife and put it down again and took up a book of old histories because she would not let insight be the weapon only of men. She read of queens who had done nothing and been blamed for all, and of queens who had done much and been blamed for all, and she thought, if I must be blamed anyway, I will choose what I am blamed for. In that time on the Iron Islands, a man with one eye dreamed of a horn blowing and a dragon who would come and make his small sea a bath. And in that time at the Red Keep, where stones hold heat in the daytime and let it go at night like grudges, the white sword kept its watches. The small man sharpened his wits, the hand wrote and scratched and counted. The queen stitched and smiled and learned to frown like a lady. The king laughed, stopped, and then laughed again. The bells were not always jaculating joy. Sometimes they told fear, but they told, and men listened. When the first real snow came down past the wall that year, it came in flakes fat as coins. Jon Snow stood with his hand no longer wrapped and lifted his palm and let them touch a scar puckered like a mouth. He thought of a father in a city of sun, and a king with a brother's face, and a woman in red who saw him when she shut her eyes. "We will hold," he said, and the boys at his back, who were becoming men too quickly, said the same thing because they had not yet learned how often that is a boast. He did not mean it as a boast. He meant it as a promise. Promises are only words to some. To others they are stone. He had been born to a name that was not a name. He had been given a cloak that was an end and a beginning. He had burned a hand to save a life that had already ended. He turned and looked along the wall where shadows move when the light moves and said the promise again without speaking. The wind took it. The wind is very old. It has carried worse words. It carried his as carefully as it could and dropped it where it would do most good. In the south, a red woman opened her eyes. In the east, the girl with dragons smiled because they had learned a new trick. In the west, a lioness taught a boy to put away his lip and pick up his pride carefully, in small amounts. In the center, a king turned a page and did not ask his hand to read it for him, and when he reached the end of the line, he did not frown as if the letters had run away. He read it again, slower, and then he signed his name,